Hi, I'm Lori Freeman from Mohawk Medicinals, and this is part 2 of Male Anatomy and Physiology. There is a part 3 that follows this, which will mostly be hormonal control. This particular part will focus on physiology. If you missed part 1, I'll put the link right here so that you can get to it, and you will have instructions on how to get to part 3 when you get to the end of this broadcast. Anyways, I really am happy that you're here. Thank you so much for wanting to learn about these systems of our body and to help your community in its health.
Okay. So now I'm going to talk about physiology. That was it for kind of the anatomy, the structure. And this gets a little more hairy. Physiology is always hairier than anatomy. So we'll start with the erection. What causes an erection? It's actually the release of nitric oxide that's released by the penis itself. So by the tissues of the penis, they make this nitric oxide. And that nitric oxide causes arterioles, so small arteries, to relax. And when they relax, they expand, and that causes blood flow into the corpora cavernosum and the corpora spongiosum. So most of that blood goes into the cavernosum. That was the outside layer. And as the blood flows in there, it compresses the veins leading away from the penis. So less blood leaves than goes in. And so that causes the erection. And remember I told you that blood does go into the corpus spongiosum, but it doesn't expand quite as much because you don't want to close off the urethra. And at this time, as soon as that erection happens, these glands, those little pea-sized glands, the bulbourethral glands, secrete mucus because they want to prime the urethra so that it's going to be okay for the semen to go through. At the same time, I thought I missed something there. Nope. Okay. So once you've got an erection, then when the conditions are right, there'll be ejaculation. This is a spinal reflex. So the actual reflex comes from the spine. And as soon as that happens, the bladder sphincter clamps down. So no urine will leave the bladder. So that's the first thing that happens. So all the other muscles are going to squeeze, but you don't want anything to come out of the bladder. So it squeezes right down. And then all the ducts and the glands contract and create the semen. It all enters the pathway, the duct system. Those muscles are at the end of the bulb of the penis and the crura, both of those, start doing a series of contractions, and all of that moves the semen out of the penis. So it shoots it out at like 11 miles an hour. I mean, it's fast. Yeah, you wonder who measured that, right? Or how it was measured, yeah. And then there are other systemic changes, whole body changes that happen during ejaculation, rapid heartbeat, that the blood pressure goes up, and there's just generalized skeletal muscle contraction that are related. But the real important part for the sperm and for reproduction is this part. So when men have erectile dysfunction, which, we hear lots about, you get it all in your spam and whatnot, in your email, right? You get all those ads for Viagra and whatnot. So what do those things do? Well, usually there's not enough of that nitric oxide released, and that's often, not always, but often the case is when a man can't achieve an erection is because of deficient nitric oxide. So those products that come out like Viagra actually make the tissue more sensitive to the nitric oxide that's there. So all of those things increase the effect of the nitric oxide. They don't add any nitric oxide as far as I know. So they're just making it more sensitive to it. Of course, there's a whole lot of other factors besides deficient nitric oxide that can cause erectile dysfunction, and I listed some of them here. Specifically, obviously, if you have problems with blood flow, then you're not going to be able to maintain an erection, or if there's a problem with the nervous system. But I wasn't going to spend a lot of time. I just listed a bunch of them there. Oh, we're doing great on time. That's good news. All right, so let's talk about how sperm are formed. So spermatogenesis is the formation of sperm, and that's going to happen in those seminiferous tubules. Remember, in the lobules down here in the testes. If we do a cross section through one of those seminiferous tubules, it's gonna look like this. There'll be many of these, so you'll see lots of, tubes. In between those tubes, there are interstitial cells. So when you bring tubes together, the cells that fill in the little gaps, those are going to become important to us at one point. And then the tubes themselves are surrounded by connective tissue, and you can see the cells all the way around. We're going to look at those cells, and these are going to be cells that create sperm and also nourish the sperm or the pre-sperm, we'll call them, for lack of a better word right now. So let's go from there. So if we look a little closer, here you can see 3 seminiferous tubules, and those interstitial cells here, sometimes they're called interstitial cells and sometimes they're called Leydig cells. It depends on what book you look at. This was just the guy who discovered them. If we look inside one of these seminiferous tubules, there's 2 kinds of cells to start. There's the spermatogonium. Those are the ones that are going to create the sperm. That's where the sperm are actually going to come from. And then there's cells that are around those. Those are called Sertoli cells or sustenacular cells. I'm going to call them Sertoli cells because that's what all my pictures are. But in some books you'll see sustenacular cells. So we look closer. So if here's in this picture one of those Sertoli cells, and then these are the spermatogonium. All right? But I'm going to blow up just this section here. And look at this. This whole cell is a Sertoli cell, and then there's one on the other side, right here. And you can see that they kind of wrap around this spermatogonium. You see how they wrap around? So this is like the cell membrane. So this cell it's kind of hugging, what's going to become the sperm. This cell, the spermatogonium, is the one that's going to give rise to the sperm, and that has to undergo meiosis. You remember meiosis and mitosis from your biology class? Meiosis is when you take a cell that has 2 copies of genetic material in it, like all of our body cells. We got 2 copies. We got one from our mom and one from our dad, right? And so all our cells have 2 copies. But when we're ready to reproduce, we can only give 1 copy to our kid. And so meiosis is the process where we take a cell with 2 copies of every single gene and we reduce it to 1 copy of every gene. So it's a process of 2 cell divisions. So this cell undergoes 1 cell division, and then each of those undergoes another cell division, and you end up with 4 cells. Each of those just has a single copy of genes. It's these cells that become sperm. Now, sperm are really interesting because really a fully developed sperm, this one would be fully developed, has virtually no cytoplasm. Really all it is a nucleus. So it sheds its cytoplasm. And you can see that process here. Here, before these are spermatids, before they're full-fledged sperm, they have their regular cell, they have cytoplasm, there's their nucleus. But you can see how the cytoplasm gets like squeezed off of them, and eventually it blebs off. And so what they are is just a nucleus here. They do have a little section here called the midpiece, where there's a ton of mitochondria. And if you remember, mitochondria are the things that give cells or can extract energy from glucose or fructose. Fructose gets changed into glucose. And so the thing that drives the sperm, the thing that needs to drive that tail, that flagellum, is here. This is like the motor. So they do have mitochondria, but they've lost just about everything else in the cell. So all they can do is basically cell respiration so they can get energy out of sugar and deliver this genetic piece, the nucleus, to the egg. All the rest of the cytoplasm is gone. So they lose everything else, Golgi apparatus and ER and all that stuff, ribosomes, all that junk.
What does the body do?
It gets reabsorbed.
Oh,
okay. So ultimately, that's part of, as the sperm move from the seminiferous tubules into the epididymis, remember they had all those microvilli, right, or the stereocilia I told you about? Part of what they absorb is this stuff. that got discarded.
And how do they feed?
How do they feed? They just absorb sugar.
The whole thing, or is it
Well,
absorbed just to a certain point?
I don't know. I'm imagining that this is the section that absorbs the most sugar, because that's where the mitochondria are. Sugar moves into cells down a concentration gradient. Usually there's a gated channel to allow sugar to go from outside the cell to inside the cell, but it moves from an area of high concentration to low concentration. So it's not pumped. There isn't a pump.
Is it like absorption?
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's diffusion. If I opened a bottle of perfume up here, it would move from a high concentration out to you guys to a low concentration till it was equally concentrated everywhere in the room, right? Eventually, that's diffusion from just a passive movement. There's no pump. There's no energy requiring anything. So because there's a lot of mitochondria there, they're using glucose up. Actually, it's fructose. That's the primary sugar, but that gets converted into glucose once it enters. But because there's a lot of fructose on the outside of the cell, right where the mitochondria are, they're reducing that the concentration because they're using it up. And so they maintain a concentration gradient. So I imagine most of the movement will be right there at the mid piece and not out here. But I don't know that for sure, but that's how most cells work. Okay. Just a couple other things here. So as this cell becomes sperm, the sperm become foreign to the male. In other words, they're going to leave the male. They have to be more like the female, so the female will accept them. Right? So they have to shed their maleness. And what makes a cell what makes them self, what makes your cells you, are the proteins that are in the cell membrane. So every cell has a cell membrane about it. And in that cell membrane, that's primarily made out of lipids. And in that cell membrane, there are proteins, so sticking through. Those proteins are what indicate self. So you recognize the proteins on your cells, and that tells you they're your cells. And if somebody else says cells enter you, you recognize those proteins as somebody else's, and so you try to get rid of them. All right? So that's what happens when you reject blood or you reject tissues, but you'd also reject sperm. Well, sperm have to become more like female, right? They have to be designed so they're less likely to be rejected by the female. So they get rid of some of those proteins, so they're not as recognizable. What happens then is they also become unrecognizable to the male. They're no longer the male's self. They're going to go away. They're going to leave him. And so the male's immune system will start recognizing those sperm as other and actually destroy them. So these Sertoli cells, which are wrapped around the developing sperm, have something called a tight junction right here. That means that from this point on, this part cannot communicate with that part. The male immune system doesn't go beyond here. It doesn't go out into this part of his body, inside of those seminiferous tubules, because then they would destroy those developing sperm. So these cells that are supporting this development block the male's immune system from breaking down his own sperm. Right? So that's a really important spot. The other thing that these Sertoli cells do is they nourish the developing sperm. They feed them all the things they need. They also clean, so they'll get rid of some of the cytoplasm that's being, shed off. And they secrete some testicular fluid, and that includes androgens. We'll come back to the androgens, but just remember that they're being secreted here by the Sertoli cells. Okay, I think that's all I want to say about that. Once you have a spermatid, so this is one of those cells that just has one set of chromosomes in it, then it goes through that developmental process. This shows step by step what happens. I won't go through all of that, but that takes like 64 to 72 days. It takes a long time, relatively, to make sperm. The thing, though, is that with guys, they make them all the time. Once they hit puberty, till the time they die, they're making them every day. So it doesn't matter how long, once you got a set, They make them and make them and make them. Unlike females, we make only one a month. These guys make zillions of them. I tell my students that's why guys are always trying to get rid of theirs, and we're always trying to hang on to ours. So just a little talk about infertility because this is a good place to talk about it. So one in 7 Americans experiences this. So 1 in 7 couples experience this, and most of the time, I'll say much of the time, it's due to sperm issues. And so, what kind of issues? Well, there are estrogen-like compounds that counteract testosterone and don't allow the development of the sperm. We'll talk more about that in a minute, about how the hormone system works. Antibiotics can stop the growth of sperm. They can inhibit sperm. So they act a lot like these estrogens, right? And those estrogens can be environmental. They can come from meat when they, put hormones in meat. They can come from PVC and other toxins that are in our environment. There's this whole thing now with phthalates that were in plastics, pesticides, herbicides. You can go on and on. You could think about all the things that act like estrogens. And they now have shown that, I think it's like nationwide, I'm pretty sure I saw it was nationwide, that the sperm count has gone down in men because of these. And it's because of these things that are stopping the production of sperm. There are compounds that lead to abnormal sperm with 2 tails, or they'll be misshapen, or they won't have, I didn't talk about the actual tip of that sperm, but the actual tip won't be right, and that tip is really important because it's enzymes that break down the outside layers of the egg. But I'm not gonna go there. So compounds that might lead to that include things like radiation, but marijuana and some other drug use, lack of things in your diet like selenium, or alcohol consumption. Sometimes sperm will lose their ability to be motile, so they'll look fine, but they won't be able to move their flagellum, and that's because they're missing particular proteins in the cell membrane, and those proteins are calcium channels. Otherwise, if it's not because you're not making sperm, it could just be because one of the ducts is blocked, so that would just be an obstruction. Could just be hormonal, so you're not making sperm because there's hormones that are imbalanced, and we're going to talk about that. It could be oxidative stress that damages DNA. Does everybody know about oxidative stress and what that is? You probably hear about, oxidative stress and free radicals and all that stuff, and antioxidants. Oxidation is when a molecule loses an electron. That's what it is. I mean, it could be an electron, it could be a hydrogen atom counts as 1 electron. So when a molecule loses an electron, we say it's oxidized. So where does it lose it to? Well, there are other chemicals that steal electrons. All right, that they are more electronegative, is what we say. So when 2 molecules get close to each other, if one of them has a stronger attraction for the electron than the other one, then the electron leaves one and gets attached to the other one. The one that it's leaving from is the molecule that's oxidized. Oxidation is a normal thing that happens in metabolism, but many of the compounds in our environment are also chemicals that cause oxidation. So cells have an oxidative stress. In a natural state, they have an oxidative stress. So there are chemicals within the cell that are losing electrons. Antioxidants, and so free radicals, so let's just back up. We heard all these bad things about free radicals, right? Free radicals are just those kinds of molecules that can steal electrons, that cause the oxidation of molecules in your cell. So if there's a plethora of free radicals in your cell, there's going to be a lot of oxidation, and that means your molecules aren't going to have the number of electrons that they need. So DNA can be affected by that. That's one of them. There are other molecules as well. But that would be something that damages DNA. And because DNA contains the information to make all the proteins in your cell, you don't want it damaged. That would be one of the reasons why maybe a protein doesn't get made, is if the DNA there is damaged And so now you don't have the information. It's not the right information to make that protein. Antioxidants are compounds that actually will give up an electron, right, and give back the electron that was lost due to oxidation. Right? So that's what an antioxidant is. So it's a compound that will donate electrons. So it reverses that oxidation process. Okay. So one reason for infertility would be oxidative stress. Those are compounds, too many toxins that are oxidizing too many of the cells, either the Sertoli cells or the spermatogonium itself, the thing that becomes the sperm, and damages that DNA. And finally, of course, overheating. Right? If it's too hot, they have to maintain that 34 degrees. It can't be 37 degrees. They'll be too hot. So tight pants, you know, guys who spend a lot of time in a sauna or a hot tub will actually have reduced sperm counts because it's too hot. Huh? Tighty whities. Well, I don't think they're that tight. It's more like Speedos, you know. They wore them all the time under their clothes. Oh, where'd that come up? Okay. How you guys doing?
You're going at lightning speed here.
Yeah, I have to.